Picture the scene. An elite Wehrmacht infantry division, a perfectly tuned killing machine, suddenly halts its advance on Stalingrad. Hundreds of soldiers, artillery, aviation, all frozen before nothing. In German reports, this will be termed stubborn battles with unknown enemy forces. But the truth turned out to be far more terrifying and insane than any military textbook. This entire armada was not fighting a regiment, nor a company. It was fighting ghosts. It was fighting dead iron, pulled by the strings of a single man. A man who had turned into a skeleton weighing 43 kilograms. A man who lived for 107 days in an icy steel coffin, surviving on mice and his own rage. How did one mechanic make the enemy believe in the existence of an entire platoon, using only logs, ropes, and engineering calculation? And what did he do when the Germans finally opened the hatch of his tank? This is a story that is impossible to believe, but one that everyone is obligated to know. Watch until the end. The finale will overturn your understanding of the capabilities of the human spirit. The earth bucked. First came the blow, dull, heavy, as if the hammer of God had come down right on the crown of the turret. The sound caught up a moment later. My eardrums were pressed inward. The world collapsed to the twang of a snapped string. Dust clogged my lungs before my brain realized we had stopped. August 1942. The Don steppe is burning. The sun melts armor, but the heat radiating from the red-hot metal is nothing compared to the fire devouring the horizon. The Junkers came in flights, methodically, like on a firing range. They weren't bombing. They were hammering us into the loam. Inside the tank is hell. Fumes, the smell of burnt rubber, and the sickly sweet scent of hydraulics. I, Senior Sergeant Gromov, the driver-mechanic, try to feel for the levers. My hands won't obey. My fingers tremble with a fine, nasty rattle. Left clutch, dead. Right, dead. The gas pedal goes to the floor with no resistance. "Start it!" The shout of Commander Lieutenant Sokolov cuts through the ringing in my ears. "Gromov, goddammit, start it! We're leaving!" I don't answer. I already know the diagnosis. My body, fused with this machine over months of fighting, feels the death of the mechanism. I climb out of the driver's hatch. The air outside is thick as jelly, saturated with dust and death. The inspection is short, professional. No emotions, only facts. A close hit by a high-explosive aerial bomb. A piece of shrapnel, a heavy, jagged chunk of cast iron, struck the most vulnerable spot. It went through the fender, tore up the transmission compartment, and entered the heart of the machine. The cylinder block of the V12 engine is cracked. 12 cylinders, 500 horsepower, which just a minute ago were pulling 30 tons of steel, have turned into a useless pile of dead aluminum. Oil gushes onto the scorching earth like black, smoking blood. The left track is severed, the links twisted outward like broken ribs. The idler wheel is torn from its axle. The tank is dead. As a mobile unit, it has ceased to exist. Now it is simply 30 tons of immobile iron in the middle of the steppe. "Well?" Sokolov leans down from the turret. His face is twisted, his eyes white with limestone dust. "The engine is done, Comrade Lieutenant." My voice sounds hollow, as if coming from a barrel. The block is smashed, track broken. We've arrived. Chaos of retreat reigns all around. The infantry is running, not in an organized manner, bounding from cover to cover, but in a solid gray stream, abandoning kit bags, rifles, and consciences. Trucks roar, spinning their wheels in the sand. Someone is screaming. Someone is praying. Shells are bursting closer, kicking up fountains of black earth. German tanks are already somewhere nearby. Their clatter is audible through the roar of explosions. Sokolov jumps to the ground, examines the hole, kicks the sagging track with his boot. "Burn the machine," he commands. His voice cracks into a squeal. "Regulations! Do not leave it to the enemy! A grenade in the tank! A grenade in the breach! Move, Gromov! The infantry is leaving. We'll be cut off." He is right. According to regulations, an immobilized machine that cannot be evacuated must be destroyed, turned into a torch so that the Fritzes get only a charred husk. The crew must retreat to their own lines. I climb back into the turret. The loader, a young guy, still completely green, is clutching a machine gun drum to his chest. He is shaking. "Get out," I tell him. "Get the hell out of here." I crawl to the breech of the cannon myself. F-34. 76 millimeters of arguments. I run my palm over the cold steel of the bolt. The metal is smooth, oiled. The breech block wedge moves softly, with a juicy, greasy click. The elevation mechanism works. The traverse, tight, but it moves. The turret is intact. The ammo rack is full. 77 shells. High explosive, armor-piercing. This is not scrap metal. This is a pillbox, a long-term firing point, an armored capsule. "Are you deaf?" Sokolov is already holding an F-1 grenade. "Blow the tanks! The Germans are a kilometer away!" I look at him from above, out of the hatch. A switch flips in my head. There is no fear. There is cold calculation. If I run with them now, across the open steppe, I will be killed. By shrapnel, a stray bullet, the tracks of a German panzer. I am a mechanic. I know iron. In the field, I am meat. In the tank, I am armor. "No," I say, quietly, but so he hears. "What?" Sokolov freezes. "Tribunal! I'll shoot you!" "The cannon is intact," I cut him off. "Full ammo load. 45 millimeters of armor at an angle. I will not burn a functioning gun. You'll die here, alone. It's a coffin, Gromov. A steel coffin. It's my machine." I close the hatch. The clang of metal cuts off the commander's hysteria. I hear him cursing outside. I hear them running away. The stomp of boots recedes, dissolving into the general roar of catastrophe. I am left alone. The silence inside the tank presses on the ears harder than the roar. The engine is cooling, the metal crackling as it contracts. I sit in the gunner's seat. Now I am the commander, and the gunner, and the loader, and the mechanic of a dead engine. I look through the periscope. The dust is settling. The steppe is emptying. Our guys are gone. I check my pockets. A pouch of tobacco, half full. Matches, a penknife. In the canteen, warm, musty water, enough for 3 swallows, no more. In the kit bag, a couple of rusks wrapped in a rag and a piece of salt pork, rancid, hard as a rock. That is all. How long will this last? A day? 2? I look at the ammo rack. The shells shine with a dull yellow light in the gloom. 77 lives, 77 deaths. This is my currency, my food, my water, my air. As long as I have shells, I exist. First rule of mechanics: a system strives for rest. But there will be no rest here. I crawl over to the driver's seat. I need to plug the holes. If a bullet hits the fuel tank, I burn. If shrapnel severs the trigger linkage, I become unarmed. I find rags, oily and dirty. I plug the gaps. It won't help against a shell, but it gives an illusion of integrity. My hands do everything themselves, on autopilot. Muscle memory. A .22 wrench. Tighten the bolts of the observation device. Wipe the gun sight optics. The glass must be clean. Dirt on the glass is error. Error is a miss. A miss is death. The sun is leaning towards sunset. Inside the tank, it is becoming stifling, like an oven. The armor has heated up during the day and is now radiating heat inward. Sweat floods my eyes, acrid and salty. I take off my headset, wipe my face with the sleeve of my coveralls. The coveralls are stiff with grease and blood. Whose blood? I don't remember. Maybe mine. Ahead, where the sun is setting, a new wave of dust rises. Dark, heavy. These are not our 1.5-ton trucks. It's them. The Wehrmacht. The 295th Infantry Division. They are heading for the Don. They think the path is open. They think there is no one here except corpses and burnt-out equipment. I press against the sight, set the range, direct fire. The crosshairs settle on the road they will take. Fear comes in waves. Cold, sticky terror that twists my stomach into a knot. I am alone. For tens of kilometers around, not a single friend. Only enemies. I am walled up in a 30-ton box. If they get close, they'll pelt me with grenades. If they bring up a flamethrower, they'll roast me alive. If they just surround me, I'll die of thirst. But this fear is animal. It's somewhere in the gut. My head is clear, cold, engineering-like. I am not a hero. I am just a stubborn man who doesn't want to die in a field. I want to sell my hide dearly. The exchange rate is set. 1 shell, 1 target. It's getting dark in the turret. I cock the cannon's bolt. The click in the silence sounds like a gunshot. Now all that remains is to wait. Wait and listen to the engine cooling. Listen to hope dying and calculation being born. Night covers the steppe. The night before the first day of my new life. Life in a steel coffin. The morning began not with sunrise, but with vibration. It came from underground, transmitted through the hull's belly, passed through the soles of my boots, and resonated in my spine. A heavy, low-frequency hum. Wind doesn't sound like that. A foreign army sounds like that. I sat motionless, having turned into just another part of the mechanism, listening to this rhythm. The sun slowly crawled out from behind the horizon, flooding the steppe with dirty yellow light. The air instantly began to heat up. Through the viewing slit, I saw the heat haze distorting perspective, making the bushes tremble as if in a fever. Along with the heat came the dust, a huge, dense cloud crawling from the west. They walked confidently, arrogantly. The 295th Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht did not sneak. It flowed across the steppe with a proprietary gait. In front, kicking up clouds of gray powder, moved motorcyclists. Behind them, trucks. Opel Blitz trucks covered with canvas, tractors with pontoon sections on trailers. They were carrying a crossing. They were carrying a bridge over which their tanks were supposed to step across the Don and enter Stalingrad. I watched them through the optics of the sight. Magnification made their faces frighteningly close. I saw rolled-up uniform sleeves, unbuttoned collars, white spots of handkerchiefs on necks. They were laughing. Someone was smoking, lazily blowing smoke into the scorched sky. An officer in the lead vehicle was showing the driver something, pointing to the river. For them, the war here was over. Only logistics remained. Just drive to the water, drop the pontoons, build the bridge. There are no Russians. The Russians ran, leaving burning scrap metal in the steppe. My tank was exactly that kind of scrap metal to them. Blackened, covered with earth and branches, with a sagging track, a typical corpse of past battles. They didn't look at me as a threat. They saw a decoration of victory. The distance was closing. 500 meters, 400, 300. Inside the turret, there was a thick, heavy smell of machine oil and my own sweat. My heart was beating not in my chest, but somewhere in my throat, hindering my breathing. But my hands lived their own life. My right palm lay on the traverse mechanism handwheel. My left squeezed the trigger grip. No trembling, only a cold, calculating spasm of readiness. 200 meters, pistol shot range. The lead vehicle, a heavy half-track tractor with a section of the pontoon bridge, entered the crosshairs. I saw the rivets on the side. I saw the dirt on the fender. I could have killed the driver with a rifle, but I needed to stop the column. Plug this artery. High explosive, I whispered to myself. The command sounded dry, like the click of a switch. Inhale. Hold breath. Smooth movement of the finger. The shot hit my ears, despite the headset. The tank rocked. The recoil system clanged, spitting a smoking shell casing onto the floor of the fighting compartment. In that same second, a ball of fire swelled in the sight. The shell hit exactly at the junction of the cab and the bed of the tractor. It wasn't a movie explosion. It was the physical dismantling of matter. The cab simply vanished, turning into a cloud of shrapnel, glass, and meat. The tractor jerked, spun across the road. The heavy pontoon section tore from its mountings, tipped over with a crash, crushing running soldiers. The column stopped. The rear vehicles smashed into the front ones. The screech of metal drowned out the screams. They didn't understand where the death had come from. Panic is a chain reaction. I saw them pouring out of the truck beds like peas from a torn sack, falling into the dust, covering their heads with their hands. They were expecting an air raid. They were looking at the sky. No one looked at the rusty carcass of the T-34 in the bushes. I cranked the handwheel. The turret turned heavily. The teeth of the turret ring groaned, but the crosshairs crept to the left. Next target. A truck with infantry. Wooden sides. For a 76mm shell, the material resistance equals 0. Second shot. The truck was torn apart from the inside. Planks, wheels, human bodies. All of this flew upward in a single bloody fountain. The shockwave swept away the motorcyclists riding alongside. Now I switched to the machine gun. The coaxial DT hammered against my shoulder with a fine, angry tremor. A disc with 63 rounds. I didn't aim at individual people. I worked by area. Tracers stitched through canvas, tore tires, crumbled the bricks of roadside markers. It was butcher's work performed with engineer's tools. Short bursts, 3 or 4 shots. Correction, burst again. Chaos reigned in the sight. Germans darted about, not understanding the vector of the attack. Smoke from the burning vehicles blanketed the road, mixed with dust, creating a perfect screen. They were shooting wildly, into the steppe, into the sky, toward the river. I emptied the disc and went back to the cannon. The third shell went into the tail of the column to finally lock them in this fiery bag. Short. A fountain of earth flew up in front of the bumper of the rearmost fuel tanker. Correction. Half a turn of the elevation wheel. Shot. The fuel tanker flared up silently, as if someone had switched on a giant lamp. A second later, the sound of the explosion rolled in, a low, guttural roar. A pillar of greasy black smoke propped up the sky. Now they were trapped. Ahead, a burning tractor and twisted metal of pontoons. Behind, a wall of fire. 3, I said aloud. 3 vehicles. Minus the pontoons. Inside the tank, it became unbearable. Powder gases didn't have time to be drawn out by the fan. My eyes stung, my throat scratched as if I had swallowed broken glass. I coughed, wiping tears with a dirty sleeve, but didn't tear myself away from the sight. Shell casings rolled on the floor, ringing with every movement like bells on a leper's neck. The fight lasted 5 minutes at most. For me, these 5 minutes stretched into an eternity compressed into an algorithm. Load, aim, fire, casing. No rage, no hatred. Only the physics of ballistics and the strength of materials. I was turning the complex, organized structure of the enemy column into the chaos of entropy. Then came silence. Relative silence. The crackle of fire, the screams of the wounded, distant commands in German could be heard. The shooting stopped. They crawled away, hid behind folds in the terrain, behind ravines, behind surviving vehicles. I ceased fire. There was no point in wasting ammunition. I had revealed myself. Now they know. I leaned back against the seat, feeling the adrenaline slowly leaving behind emptiness and trembling in my knees. My hands were black with soot. I looked at my fingers. They were hooked, as if still gripping the controls. It took effort to straighten them. This was first blood. Easy blood. I hit them when they were open, relaxed, stupid. I used the element of surprise like a lever to overturn the situation. But the element of surprise is a single-use resource, like a grenade fuse. It burned out. Now the real hunt will begin. I pressed my forehead against the cold, now seeming cold compared to the heat of the barrel, breech of the cannon. I heard the world changing outside the armor. Screams became organized. Radios started working. Somewhere out there, behind the smokescreen, Wehrmacht officers are now spreading out maps, drawing sectors, calling for artillery or aviation. They are no longer carefree tourists. They are professional killers who have been insulted, and they will wash away this insult with blood. My blood. I assessed my position. The tank stood in a revetment dug by our troops a week ago and was well camouflaged by bushes. I can't be seen from the road, only the muzzle brake and the gun mantlet. But muzzle flashes unmask instantly. It will soon get hot here, much hotter than from the August sun. Tactics must be changed. To sit and wait means to die. The tank is immobile, maneuvering is impossible. That means I will have to maneuver not with armor, but with information, with deception, with illusion. I looked through the sight again. Smoke from the burning fuel tanker drifted along the ground, blocking the view. That is good. Smoke is time. I have maybe an hour, maybe 2, while they bring up anti-tank guns, while they deploy mortars. Well, Gromov, I croaked into the emptiness of the turret. My voice was alien, scratchy. You wanted war? You got it. Personal, exclusive. I reached into the kit bag, took out that piece of salt pork, cut off a thin, almost transparent slice, placed it on my tongue. The taste of rancid fat seemed like ambrosia to me. My stomach clenched in a spasm, demanding more, but I forced myself to stop. Calories are fuel. Fuel must be conserved. There is a long shift ahead. I understood. They won't launch a frontal attack on a tank with rifles. They will try to smash me remotely, level me with the ground using artillery, turn this hill into a lunar landscape. So, I need to make them shoot at the wrong place. I looked at the hatch. The sun was at its zenith. The day was just beginning. The first day of 107. But back then, I didn't know that. I knew only one thing. I am alive, the gun is loaded, and the enemy is stopped. Stopped for now. A plan began to form in my head. An insane, engineering, desperate plan. If I cannot move the tank, I must force reality around it to move. I must create phantoms. I opened the hatch and stuck my head out. The air smelled of burning and roasted meat. The sweet, nauseating smell of war. Somewhere in the distance, motors hummed. Reinforcements were arriving. I took a deep breath of this poisonous cocktail and dove back into the steel belly. The work was just beginning. Night brought no coolness. It brought darkness, thick and dense as heavy oil. In this darkness, every rustle seemed like the step of a saboteur, and the crackle of the cooling engine like the sound of a cocked bolt. But sleeping was forbidden. Sleep in my situation is not rest. It is an unauthorized system shutdown leading to a fatal crash. I knew. The Germans won't attack at night without reconnaissance, but in the morning they will strike. And if they see a single immobile tank in front of them, they will burn me in 2 minutes. The arithmetic of war is simple. 1 equals 0. To survive, one must become a multitude. I climbed out of the hatch. The air was still. The silence was broken only by the distant, barely audible hum of German generators on the other bank. They had light. They had hot food. I had an axe, a coil of cable, and rage. The task was engineering. Change the tactical map of the area without resources. Materials, foraging, tools, hands and an entrenching tool. I slid into the ravine where stunted, twisted trees grew. The axe bit into the wood with a dull, wet sound. Every blow resonated in my shoulder, reminding me of the day spent at the levers. But I felt no pain. The organism had switched to emergency mode, where resources are taken from the inviolable reserve. I chopped trunks, thin, crooked, damp, dragged them up to the position, dragging them. The earth crumbled under my boots. I wheezed, spitting out viscous saliva mixed with dust. One log, 50 kilograms of dead weight. I needed about 2 dozen. Up and down, like a piston in a cylinder, only without oil. At a distance of 500 meters, the human eye does not distinguish details. It sees a silhouette, geometry. For an observer, a tank is the low rectangle of the hull and a turret. I needed to create the geometry of a threat. I drove stakes into the ground, hard as concrete. My hands, already battered by the levers, began to bleed. Calluses burst, skin came off in strips, exposing raw meat. The axe handle became slippery and sticky. I wiped my palms on my pants, leaving dark streaks, and continued to pound with the butt. The first frame went up to the left of my tank, about 40 meters away. A crude construction of branches and poles. I stretched pieces of canvas found in a wrecked truck over it, threw wormwood branches on top. In the dark, it looked like a pile of trash. But in the morning, when the sun casts long shadows, this pile of trash will become a T-34 in a revetment. "Stand straight, Private Oak," I croaked, tying the barrel, a long, straight pole, to the turret. "Don't slouch in front of the Fritzes." My voice sounded wild in the night silence. I was talking to a tree. This was a bad sign, but the silence was worse. The silence was driving me crazy. I placed the second dummy to the right. This one was worse, more crooked, but I piled weeds on it almost to the roof, like a tank in a deep trench. But static wasn't enough. Dead tanks don't scare. What scares is what moves. I needed kinematics, the engineering of deception. I found a steel cable in the spare parts box, thin for towing. Cut it into pieces with a chisel. I didn't have a pulley system, had to improvise. I used smooth branches as guides, greasing them with leftover grease from the grease gun. The cable ran from my tank to the left dummy, around a stake driven into the ground, and attached to the pivoting frame of the wooden turret. The lever principle. The simplest mechanics, known since the time of Archimedes. If I pull the end of the cable here, inside my hatch, then over there, 40 meters away, the wooden construction will creak and turn a couple of degrees. I ran a second line to the right dummy. Now I was a puppeteer. My tank became the control center of this shadow theater, a spider in the center of a web. By 3 in the morning, the work was finished. My hands shook so much I couldn't roll a cigarette. My back muscles had turned to stone and burned with fire. I fell onto the armor, staring into the black sky. No stars were visible because of the smog hanging over the steppe. I was thirsty. The water in the canteen had run out during the day. I licked my parched lips. I didn't notice the taste of blood anymore. My stomach was empty and cold. Hunger had ceased to be a sharp desire to eat, turning into a dull, aching void, sucking out my strength. I climbed inside the tank. The fighting compartment still smelled of gunpowder. I checked the system. Took the ends of the cables, fed through the loader's hatch into my hands. Pulled the left one. Heavy. Friction was wild. The cable cut into my palm, tearing off what was left of the skin. But I felt compliance. Out there, something moved. "It works," I whispered. "Alive." I spent the rest of the night in a semi-conscious state, sitting in the gunner's seat. My eyes were closing, but my brain kept working, calculating scenarios. If they hit with artillery, the dummies will shatter into splinters. This will reveal the deception. So, I need to act aggressively. Make them believe that this platoon is real. Dawn came with a gray, murky light. Fog from the river crept into the lowlands. The most dangerous time. The eye seeks familiar outlines. I glued myself to the sight. The Germans weren't sleeping. On the other side of the road, about 1.5 kilometers away, I saw movement. Glints of optics. They were studying us. I imagined what a German observer sees through his stereoscopic telescope. Steppe, bushes, and 3 dark, low silhouettes barely protruding from the ground, muzzles pointing in their direction. A chattering sound was heard in the sky. A frame. A Focke-Wulf reconnaissance plane. Twin boom, looking like a flying bookshelf. It was flying low, looking for targets for the artillery. This was the moment of truth. If the pilot realizes that 2 tanks out of 3 are firewood and rags, I'm finished. The plane passed over us, banked. I pressed myself into the seat as if I could become smaller. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. He saw everything. He couldn't help but see that the tanks had no heat signature, that the tracks left no trails. But a pilot sees what he expects to see. He sees a position. He sees a triangle of defense. The frame wobbled its wings and went west. They bought it. 10 minutes later, it began. The earth around erupted in fountains of explosions. They started an artillery barrage. But they weren't hitting me. They were area bombing, covering our entire platoon. Shells tore up the ground between me and the dummies. I grabbed the left cable, wrapped it around my arm, yanked it toward me with all my body weight, bracing my legs against the cannon breech. Veins on my neck bulged, my vision darkened from the strain. Out there, the wooden turret of the left dummy jerked and turned. I released the cable and rushed to the right one. A jerk. Another jerk. The creak of wood was probably audible across the whole steppe, but the roar of explosions drowned everything out. To the Germans, it looked like this. Russian tanks are maneuvering with fire. They are observing. They are alive. I returned to the site. The German infantry, which had already started to rise for an attack, went to ground. They didn't want to go against 3 tanks. 1 tank is an accident. 3 tanks is a defense system. That is already tactics. And against tactics, you need other tactics. They stopped the attack. They began regrouping again. I exhaled, feeling cold sweat run down my back. I bought time. I sold them air wrapped in canvas at the price of real armor. My hands were trembling. Blood dripped from my fingers, smearing the control levers, but I was smiling. An angry, crooked skull smile. "We stand, men," I told my wooden soldiers. "We stand to the death." The sun rose higher, promising a new day in hell. But now I wasn't alone. I had my ghost army, created from trash and my stubbornness. And as long as I pulled the strings, this army was alive. War is economics, a balance of debit and credit, where the currency is lead, TNT, and manpower. By noon, the Germans decided to invest heavily in this patch of steppe. They were tired of losing infantry and reconnaissance in force and switched to remote demolition of obstacles. It started with mortars. 80mm mines fell vertically with a nasty, howling whistle, crumbling the dry earth around my positions. The explosions landed in clusters, plowing up the space between the real tank and my wooden dummies. For them, it was a math problem. The area of a square multiplied by the density of fire equals the destruction of the enemy. I sat inside a red-hot box, clutching the cable control levers. My world had narrowed to 2 ropes and the eyepiece of the sight. The air inside thickened, became hot and viscous. The ventilation couldn't keep up. Every explosion outside resonated inside with a hollow blow of a hammer on armor, shaking scale and dust from the ceiling, clogging my collar, nose, and eyes. Impact. The earth heaved next to the left dummy. Shrapnel shredded the canvas, tore off camouflage branches. To the German spotter, it looked like a bracket. The tank should have gone silent or caught fire. I wrapped the cable around my elbow, braced my foot against the cannon breech, and pulled, sharply, until my joints cracked. Through the narrow slit of the periscope, I saw the wooden turret of the left tank jerk and turn slightly toward the explosion. It was an imitation of life, an imitation of a crew's reaction searching for a target. "Got it?" I croaked, spitting sand. "We are still here. We are angry." The Germans believed it. The fire intensified. Now regimental artillery joined in. 105mm. This was serious. Heavy, high-explosive shells tore the ground, leaving craters you could hide a horse in. The earth trembled, vibrating like living flesh under a scalpel. My task turned into an insane dance. A shot from the cannon, to show teeth. Eject the casing. Yank the right cable, so the right tank signifies presence. Yank the left, to maintain the illusion of a platoon. I darted around the fighting compartment, banging my knees and elbows on metal, choking on powder gases. Sweat poured into my eyes, stung abrasions mixed with dirt on my face, turning me into a monster. It was a duel not of destruction, but of attrition. I was exchanging their shells for my calories. An unequal exchange, but I had no choice. Flashes flickered in the sight. A battery on the other bank. I spun the hand wheel, driving the crosshairs onto a landmark, a lone, dry tree by the road. Adjusted for wind. The wind was strong, steppe wind. It blew away the smoke and dust, revealing targets. Fire. 76 millimeters of steel and explosives went to the target. A second later, a pillar of earth erupted where the German crew stood. I didn't see if I hit or not, but their rate of fire faltered. -1, I stated. The voice was needed to hear myself, to know that I hadn't gone completely deaf yet. But they were learning. They stopped bombing areas and started targeting specific points. A shell exploded 10 meters from my tank. Shrapnel lashed the armor. The ringing was such that it felt like I was sitting inside a bell. The driver's periscope cracked, covered in a spiderweb, but held. If they had hit the side, they would have punched through. 45 millimeters of armor is protection against 45s, not howitzers. I realized they had found me. The real me. I needed to switch their attention urgently. I dropped the cannon, grabbed both cables at once, pulled the left, then the right, then the left again, creating chaotic panic activity on the flanks. The wooden structures creaked, swayed, canvas flapped in the wind. From the side, it must have looked like preparation for an attack or the panic of damaged machines. The Germans bought the reflex. They shifted fire to the flanks. Shells began tearing the ground around the dummies. I saw an aviation bomb, which arrived a minute later, fall exactly on the right dummy. The explosion was of monstrous force. Trees, earth, pieces of canvas flew up to the height of a 5-story building. The shockwave rocked my tank, knocking me off my feet. I hit my head on the breech. Red circles swam before my eyes. When the dust settled a bit, I looked through the periscope. The right tank no longer existed. In its place gaped a smoking pit. Splinters, looking like bone fragments, were scattered in a radius of 50 meters. But the Germans rejoiced. I heard the tone of their chatter change, though I didn't understand the words. They had destroyed a Russian tank. They spent an aerial bomb weighing 250 kilograms and a dozen heavy shells on a pile of firewood. "You charge a high price, bastards," I whispered, wiping blood oozing from a split eyebrow. "Expensive." 1 of 3 destroyed. 2 remained. The game continued, but the stakes had risen. Now they thought they had punched a breach in the defense. The infantry rose again. Gray figures, small, bent, running from crater to crater. They were going into the dead zone, right where the explosion had just been. They thought it was clear there. I returned to the gun. My hands were trembling, but as soon as my fingers touched the metal of the hand wheels, the trembling stopped. Machine mode engaged. Loading. A unitary cartridge with a high explosive shell weighs almost 7 kilograms. In the cramped turret, in the smoke, running on fumes, it seemed made of lead. Shove it into the breech. Punch it in to seat it. Clang of the bolt. I waited. Let them get closer. Let them believe in their victory. They entered the line of fire. A group of 20 people, crouching, ran toward the crater where the right dummy used to be. They were no longer hiding. They were coming to finish off survivors. I squeezed the trigger. A shot at point-blank range, from 300 meters, with a high explosive shell against infantry. This isn't war. It's slaughter. The shell exploded in the center of the group. The blast wave in the confined space of the crater worked like a press. Those not shredded by shrapnel were killed by the pressure drop. I immediately added from the machine gun, a long, angry burst, sweeping away everything living. The DT choked. Casings poured onto my knees like hot rain. I saw those who tried to run back fall, saw them press into the ground, trying to become flat, invisible. "That's for the wood," I snarled, changing the disc. "That's for my work. I built that all night, and you broke it." The Germans rolled back. Again. They couldn't understand what they were fighting. They destroyed a tank, but shots kept coming from there. Logic broke down. Fear of the incomprehensible is stronger than fear of a bullet. A German soldier is trained to fight an enemy he can see. They didn't know how to fight ghosts that resurrect after a direct hit by an aerial bomb. A pause ensued. A ringing, deafening silence after the cannonade. Dust settled slowly, covering the armor with a gray coating resembling ash. I slid down to the floor of the tank. I had no strength to sit. My body shook with violent tremors, the come-down after the adrenaline storm. My heart pounded unevenly, skipping beats, resonating with pain in my left arm. I looked at my watch. The glass was broken, the hands frozen at 12 o'clock. Time had stopped, or died. Around me lay spent casings, dozens of brass cups, each of them someone's death or someone's saved second. I counted the remaining shells. The ammo load was melting away. 30 rounds. Only 30 times can I say no. And then? Then only iron remains. I closed my eyes. Before my inner gaze stood the picture, a burning pit where the dummy had been, and torn bodies around. No pity. Pity is a luxury of peacetime. A different ethics worked here. The ethics of survival. I forced the Germans to war with emptiness. They spent tons of steel, hundreds of liters of fuel, lost time, lost people, and all just to blow a pile of logs to smithereens. In this was my small, malicious triumph. The triumph of an engineer over brute force. But I understood. They will return. They will bring even more shells. They will call in even more planes. They are methodical. They won't stop until they plow every square meter here. And I have one cable left. One illusion. And one real tank, slowly turning into a red-hot oven. I picked up the canteen from the floor, shook it. Empty. Not even a drop sloshes. Thirst returned, sharp, cutting, as if sand had been poured down my throat. I tried to swallow, but there was no saliva. My tongue was swollen and hindered my mouth. "It's okay," I told my tank. "We'll cool down. Tonight we'll cool down." I climbed back to the periscopes. Observation cannot be stopped for a second. War takes no breaks for lunch or sleep. War is a continuous process, like corrosion. And right now, I was the only inhibitor of this corrosion on this sector of the front. Ahead was evening, and a new night, and hunger, which had already begun to gnaw at my stomach from the inside, reminding me that a human is not only spirit and rage, but also biology. And biology demanded its due. Hunger isn't emptiness in the stomach. It's the chemistry of self-destruction. The first 3 days the stomach demands, twists, howls. Then it falls silent. A phase of silence sets in, when the body begins to eat itself. First the fat goes, then the muscles. You feel your strength, your ability to pull a lever or lift a shell, dissolving into the blood, turning into murky energy for the heart's work. Food ran out a week ago. I crumbled the last rusk on Tuesday, licking crumbs from a dirty palm like communion. No water for 2 days. I know the V12 diesel down to the last screw, but I don't know how to make my body work without water. I licked condensate off the armor. It was bitter, with a taste of gunpowder soot and iron. This isn't water. It's technical fluid. Night covered the steppe with a thick, stifling blanket. In the tank, everything cooled down except me. I was shivering. This wasn't the cold of the air, it was the cold of exhaustion. Glucose in the blood dropped to a critical minimum. My brain worked in spurts, like an engine on bad fuel. Flashes of clarity alternated with lapses into viscous, sticky drowsiness. "Get up, Gromov," I ordered myself. My lips were cracked. My tongue in my mouth felt like a piece of sandpaper. "Get up or you'll croak." Today I must go. Not to shoot, not to maneuver cables. Go to get calories. I opened the escape hatch in the floor. It was the safest exit. Slid into the cool, damp-smelling pit under the tank. The earth here was soaked in oil and my urine, but this smell seemed to me the smell of home. Sortie. Distance to the nearest ruins of the farmstead, 300 meters. Crawling, at night, across neutral ground which is swept by fire from every German sentry who can't sleep. I crawled. Movements were slow, economical. Right arm, left leg. Drag the body. Freeze. Listen. The rustle of dry grass sounded like the roar of a rockfall. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I thought the Germans could hear the rhythm. A flare soared into the sky. A chandelier. It hung on a parachute, flooding the steppe with dead pale surgical light. I pressed my face into the earth. Froze, trying to merge with the bumps, become part of the landscape. Shadows became sharp, black, frightening. I felt like an insect under a microscope. The flare hissed, descending. Seconds dragged like hours. While magnesium burns, you are a target. Move, and a machine gun burst will cut you in half. The light went out. Darkness hit my eyes, blinding me even more. I crawled on. The ruins of the farmstead met me with the smell of burning and decay. Battles raged here a week ago. Of the houses, only chimneys remained, sticking up like tombstones and piles of broken brick. I was looking for a cellar. I was looking for any hole where people might have stored food. The first cellar turned out to be empty, only broken pots and rags. The second was blocked by a beam I couldn't have moved even if I were full. In the third, I found death. An old man lay there, withered, small, looking like a mummy. He didn't die from a bullet. He died from the same thing I was dying from. I stepped over him. Sorry, old man. The living needed more. In the corner, under a pile of dirty rags, I felt something hard. A sack. Small, canvas. I untied the knot with trembling fingers. Potatoes. Small, shriveled, rotten in places. But it was organic matter. It was life. Next to it stood a jar. The glass was sticky. Inside, cloudy liquid. Pickles. I pressed the find to my chest. This was more expensive than gold. More expensive than all the awards in the world. This was a ticket to tomorrow. The way back was hell. My strength ran out. I didn't crawl. I dragged my body along the ground, pushing the sack in front of me. Every meter was a battle. Colored circles danced in my eyes. Hallucinations were starting. It seemed to me the grass was whispering my name, that the earth beneath me was breathing. "Crawl," I whispered. "Crawl, you bitch. Masha is waiting." I reached the tank an hour before dawn, tumbled in through the bottom hatch, secured it, and fell onto the ammo rack. My hands shook so much I couldn't open the jar. Had to pry the lid with a bayonet. The smell of brine hit my nose, causing a spasm in my stomach. I drank the brine straight from the jar. The salty, sour liquid burned my throat, but immediately brought relief. Then I took a potato, raw, dirty, with spots of rot. I bit into it with my teeth. Taste of earth and starch. I chewed slowly, trying not to swallow everything at once so my stomach wouldn't turn inside out. The body accepted the handout with gratitude. Warmth spread through my veins. My head cleared a little. I sat in the dark, leaning my back against the cold armor, chewed rotten potato, and cried. Without sound. Tears flowed down dirty cheeks, leaving light tracks. These weren't tears of self-pity. This was a physiological reaction. Discharge. "See, Masha?" I whispered into the darkness. "I ate. We have dinner. Luxurious dinner. Potatoes Navy style." I took a letter out of my tunic pocket. The paper was worn to holes at the folds. The ink had run in places from sweat. But I didn't need light to read it. I knew every letter, every comma. The text was burned into my subcortex. "Hello, my dear Kolya." I began to read from memory, closing my eyes. My voice sounded quiet, hoarse, but calm. I was creating a cocoon of normality around myself. "We are all well. Winter is early this year. Snow has piled up to the windows. I insulated the frames with cotton like you taught. They brought us firewood, birch, dry. We heat the stove twice. The house is warm." I imagined this warmth. The smell of burning birch, the crackle of logs. I warmed myself on these words. "Nadenka is growing. She's become quite big. Yesterday she drew a tank and said it's Daddy coming home. We sewed her new felt boots. The old ones were completely worn out. She asks when you will come to fix the porch. The steppe creaks." "I'll fix it," I answered aloud. "I'll definitely fix it. Both the steppe and the roof. Just give me time, Masha. Give me time to finish the job here." The letter was my anchor. It held me back from the brink of madness. Here, in a steel box, amidst death and decay, it is easy to forget that you are human. Easy to turn into a beast living on instincts. The letter reminded me that I am Nikolai Gromov, husband, father, engineer. That there is another world where shells don't burst, where they eat hot soup from plates, not rot from the floor. We are waiting for you very much. Take care of yourself. Don't be a hero for nothing. You are the only one we have. I am taking care. I hid the letter back, closer to my body. I am taking very good care. I am the most cautious man on the entire southwestern front. My stomach stopped hurting. The energy received from the pitiful handful of carbohydrates began to be absorbed. I felt tension in my muscles replaced by heavy, cottony fatigue. But sleeping was forbidden. Dawn soon. I looked at the remaining potatoes. 4 pieces. That's a supply for 2 days. If stretched, 3. Water. I collected some dirty snow from the ground into the canteen. It will melt. Life is possible. I became a mechanism again. Lubricated, refueled, ready for work. Emotions left. Physics remained. Calories burned to give work to neurons. Neurons gave the order to hands. I climbed into the gunner's seat, checked the sight, wiped the optics with a piece of rag. The glass shone with cleanliness. The east began to gray. The sky was colored the color of clotted blood. The day promised to be clear and cold and loud. "Good morning, Gromov," I said to my reflection in the periscope. "Breakfast is over. Commencing work." I placed my hand on the elevation handwheel. The metal familiarly cooled my palm. I was fed. I was angry. I was ready to kill to live another day and read that letter again. The cannon fell silent. It wasn't the silence of a pause between shots, but the silence of the end. The breech of the F-34 stood open, greedily gaping its black maw, but there was nothing to feed it. The last brass casing, still hot, rolled on the ribbed floor, clinking with my every movement. 77 times I sent death to the other bank. 77 steel arguments. The arguments ran out. Only rage remained. I looked through the periscope. The Germans knew how to count. They realized the main caliber was out of the game. The artillery duel ended with a technical defeat of my ammo supply. Now they weren't hiding. They were going all in. 3 gray shadows separated from the shore. Assault boats. Inflatable rubber boats, packed with infantry. They came in a broad front, about 50 meters from each other, so I couldn't cover them with one burst. Motors roared, churning the water into dirty white foam. They were in a hurry. They needed to cross these 200 meters of water before Russian Ivan came up with something new. I moved to the machine gun. DT-29, Degtyaryov tank. Caliber 7.62 millimeters. This isn't a cannon. It's a sewing machine for coarse fabric. But I still had 5 discs left. 300 bullets. I pressed my cheek to the stock. The metal was slippery with sweat. Water danced in the sight. The boats were approaching frighteningly fast. I saw helmets, saw barrels of submachine guns pointed in my direction. They knew where I was. They were coming to kill. The task changed. Shooting at people is pointless. Kill one, another takes his place. The boat continues to float. Need to hit the delivery vehicle. Need to deprive them of buoyancy. Let's work, I exhaled. Finger pressed the trigger. The machine gun came alive, pushing me in the shoulder. The sound of the burst in the confined space of the turret was dry and crackling, as if ripping thick canvas. Casings poured into the catch bag. I wasn't firing at soldiers. I aimed at the waterline, at the taut, air-filled rubber sides. The first burst went high, kicking up fountains of spray behind the stern of the left boat. Correction, a bit lower. Hold breath. The second burst landed perfectly. I saw the grey rubber side of the boat suddenly become tattered, like burst skin. Air rushed out, mixing with water. The boat dipped its nose, lost geometry, turning into a shapeless rag. Soldiers spilled into the icy water. Their heavy gear, boots, pouches, greatcoats, dragged them to the bottom. They flailed, clinging to each other, but the DT continued to work, turning the water around them into a boiling cauldron. I shifted fire to the central boat. They saw what happened to their neighbors. They tried to maneuver, swerving from side to side. But on water there is no cover. The disc ran out. Dry click of the firing pin. Seconds to reload. Unclip the empty disc. Throw it on the floor. Grab a full one. Heavy, cold pancake smelling of gun oil. Insert into grooves. Click of the latch. Cock the bolt. Hands worked faster than thought. This wasn't conscious activity. It was a reflex developed by years of training. Mechanics' muscle memory. The second boat got its portion of lead. Bullets stitched the bow section. It didn't sink immediately, but lost momentum. The current started spinning it. The soldiers inside opened return fire. Bullets drummed on the tank's armor like hail on a tin roof. Some hit the viewing slits, chipping sparks and crumbs of armored glass. I instinctively squeezed my eyes shut, but immediately forced myself to open them. Can't lose the target. The third boat was the boldest. It came straight at me, not swerving. 50 meters remained to the shore. 40. I pressed the trigger. The machine gun was silent. Jammed? No. disc empty. I fumbled with my hand in the rack. Empty. Again. Empty. All discs were lying on the floor, empty and useless. I had fired the last one without even noticing. Silence fell. A terrible, cottony silence, in which only the roar of the last boat's motor and my own raspy breathing were audible. They were approaching. 30 meters. 20. I heard the bottom of the boat scrape on pebbles, heard German commands, "Schnell! Schnell!" Stomp of boots on the shore. I leaned back against the seat backrest. That's it. Mechanics ended. The physics of burning gunpowder exhausted itself. The machine became real estate. I unbuttoned the holster on my belt, took out the TT Tula Tokarev, 8 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Heavy, angular pistol, reliable as a hammer. I cocked the hammer. Then I reached into the pocket of my coveralls and took it out. F1. Lemon. A ribbed piece of cast iron weighing 600 grams. Inside, 60 grams of TNT. Lethal radius of shrapnel, 200 meters. In the confined space of a tank, it is the absolute weapon. I straightened the cotter pin ends, slowly, carefully. My fingers didn't tremble. Strange, but there was no fear. There was the calm of a man who finished his shift and is handing in his tools. "Well, come in, dear guests," I whispered. "The doors are open." They were already close. I heard their steps around the tank, crunch of sand under hobnailed boots. They weren't shooting. They wanted to take the crew alive. They thought there were many of us here, a whole platoon. They wanted trophies. Someone struck the armor with a rifle butt, a hollow, insolent sound. "Ivan, surrender!" a voice shouted from outside. "War kaput!" I looked at the grenade in my left hand, the lever pressed tightly to the body. Ring on the finger. Pull the pin, and the primer ignites. The delay fuse hisses. 3.2 seconds, or 4.2. Delay time depends on temperature in the UZRGM fuse batch. 3 seconds. 1. Inhale. 2. Remember Masha's face. 3. Eternity. I moved the pistol to my right hand, pointed the barrel at the turret hatch. "I am not Ivan," I said quietly. "I am a Soviet tank, and tanks do not surrender." The hatch lock clanged. They were opening it from the outside. Light, bright and harsh, hit the gloom of the fighting compartment. A head in a German helmet appeared in the opening. Face young, curious. Blue eyes. He saw me. Dirty, overgrown with stubble, with crazy eyes, sitting in a puddle of oil and shell casings. Saw the pistol. Saw the grenade. The smile slid off his face. He started shouting something, trying to recoil back, but others were pushing from behind. I didn't shoot him. I just showed him the ring. The moment stretched into a thin, ringing thread. We looked into each other's eyes. I, a man with nothing to lose, and he, a man who just realized he made a mistake. In these seconds, there was no ideology, no hatred. There was only naked calculation. If I release the lever, we all die. Me, him, those standing on the armor. The tank will be ripped apart from the inside. The turret will be torn off the ring. He disappeared, jumped, rolled head over heels off the armor, screaming, "Granat!" I heard them scattering, jumping into craters, pressing into the ground. The stomping receded. I remained sitting, clutching ribbed death in a sweaty palm. They didn't pass. They got scared. Not of me. They got scared of my readiness to die. I slowly, very slowly, inserted the pin back. bent the ends, placed the grenade on my knees. My heart beat somewhere in my throat, booming and painful. "Too early," I said. "Still too early. We'll live a bit longer, Kolya." They retreated, but they didn't leave. I knew that now they would be more careful. They understood that taking this steel box by storm won't work. So they will wait. Wait for hunger to kill me, or cold. But now, in this minute, I won. I won from a whole army the right to life. The right to sit another hour, another day in this cursed, icy coffin. The sun leaned towards sunset. The day was ending. Another day torn by teeth from eternity. I looked at the TT. 8 rounds. 7 for them, 1 for myself. Arithmetic is simple, honest. In my stomach, the hungry beast stirred again, reminding of itself with sharp cramping. But I paid no attention. I listened to the silence I created with my own hands. They left at dawn on the 43rd day. Didn't run, didn't retreat in panic. They just broke camp. I looked through the periscope and didn't believe my eyes. Trucks lined up in columns, tractors hitched up surviving pontoons, infantry loaded into truck beds, without fuss, businesslike. The 295th Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht, having lost a week of time here, 3 dozen soldiers and several vehicles, decided not to waste resources on one stubborn Russian. They found another crossing, somewhere upstream. I didn't shoot. There was no point. My war here ended with a victory that tasted like ash. I held the line, but the line became needed by no one. The steppe emptied. And then came the silence. It was more terrible than the cannonade. In battle, your brain is busy. Lead calculation, target search, reloading. In silence, you remain alone with yourself, and with a new enemy who knows no mercy and takes no prisoners. Winter came. It fell on the earth swiftly, like a guillotine. Just yesterday, mud squelched under tracks, and today the world became white and hard as bone. The temperature crashed, -10, -20, -30 degrees Celsius. A T-34 tank is 30 tons of steel. Steel has high thermal conductivity. It instantly sucks heat out of everything touching it. My combat vehicle turned into a freezer, into a steel crypt. Inside the hull, the temperature equalized with the outside in 2 hours. Walls were covered with frost. Breath turned into steam, which immediately settled on the metal as an icy crust. I sat inside a giant refrigerator, dressed in oily coveralls and a thin tunic. The battle began not for position, but for the thermodynamics of the body. I began to look like a ball of rags. I was wearing everything I could find in the tank and on the battlefield. 2 greatcoats taken from dead Germans, torn padded trousers, puttees on my legs. On my head, a headset over it, a wool liner and a German scarf. But the cold crawled in everywhere. It flowed along the floor as a heavy, invisible gas, bit my fingers, froze snot in my nose. Movement is life. An old truth became a law of physiology. If I sat motionless for more than 10 minutes, my limbs began to go numb. Blood thickened. The heart slowed its rhythm, trying to save energy. Sweet, cottony drowsiness set in. This was death knocking at the temples. Hypothermia, the gentlest killer. You just fall asleep and don't wake up. To not croak, I worked. Every morning I climbed out. The wind in the steppe was such that it knocked you off your feet. Prickly snow lashed the face like a sandblaster. I took a shovel and cleaned the revetment. Why? No Germans. No one will see. But this was discipline. Army order. Chaos in daily life breeds chaos in the head. If I stop cleaning the position, I stop being a soldier. I become a corpse that just still breathes. I insulated my dummies. Fixed logs knocked down by wind, tightened torn canvas. I cared for them like sick comrades. They are my army, my platoon. As long as they stand, I am not alone. Then I climbed back into the tank. The hatch froze to the coaming. Had to chip the ice with a hammer. Metal rang in the frost loudly, crystal clear. Inside, I engaged in what I called nest building. I stripped all internal lining available, canvas, felt, rags, plugged all cracks through which wind whistled. From artillery shell casings, I made a stove, but there was nothing to fuel it. Cannot burn diesel. Carbon monoxide will kill faster than cold. No wood in the steppe. I burned oily rags in the casing, a little bit at a time, just to warm my hands. The flame was pitiful, smoking, but it gave light. Living light in the kingdom of dead whiteness. Food. I finished the remains of those potatoes 2 weeks ago. Now my ration was mice. Field mice, who also sought warmth and climbed into the tank. I caught them with my hands. At first I was nauseous. Then the survival instinct turned off squeamishness. A mouse is protein. It is energy. I skinned them with a penknife, roasted tiny carcasses over the rag fire. The taste of burnt fur and bitterness became the taste of life. I lost so much weight that ribs could be counted through the padded jacket. My face turned into a mask, a skull covered in parchment skin, sunken eyes, cheeks black from frostbite. I saw my hands, clawed paws of a skeleton. But these paws continued to work, lubricate the machine gun, wipe optics, wind the watch. Time became viscous. Days merged into one endless gray strip. To not go crazy and not get lost in time, I kept a diary. On the inside of the turret next to the breach, I scratched marks with a nail. 1 stick, 1 day. 4 vertical, 1 crossing. 5. 52, I whispered, drawing another line. Lips cracked, mouth salty from blood. 52 days, Masha. A little more. I talked to her constantly. Aloud. The voice in the silence sounded eerie, like the creak of old hinges, but I needed to hear human speech. It's cold today, darling. North wind. But I insulated the hatch with a piece of greatcoat. Now it doesn't blow on my back. And yesterday a fox came. Red, beautiful. Stood, looked, and left. Probably realized there's nothing to catch here. Just iron and an angry Russian man. I told her everything. How my joints hurt. How hunger cramps my stomach. How beautifully frost shines on the sight. I invented answers. I heard her voice in the howl of the wind. Hold on, Kolya. You are strong. You are made of stone for me. Sometimes despair rolled in. Black and hopeless. So much that I wanted to take the TT and end everything with one squeeze. Why all this? Who needs this rusty coffin in an empty steppe? The division is gone. Our guys probably think I died back in August. I am a ghost. Unaccounted combat unit. In such moments, I looked at the marks on the armor. No, I told myself. You don't have the right. You took an oath. You are at your post. There was no order to retreat. No order to die either. I took out the letter. It was already falling apart. I kept it between two pieces of plexiglass broken out of a periscope. I didn't read it. I knew it by heart. I just looked at the handwriting. The curls of letters were threads holding me in this world. December broke bones with frost. The tank metal froze through. Touch it with a bare hand, skin stays on the armor. I learned to sleep in snatches, 15 minutes at a time, curled up around the warm, relatively to the icy wall, cannon breech. Woke up from shivering, did exercises, swinging arms, squats, until the heart started pounding, chasing thick blood, and sat down at the periscope again. Observation. Sectors of fire empty. Landmarks unchanged. Wind 5 meters per second. I turned into a function. A biological appendage to an optical instrument. My desires atrophied. There was no fear. There was no hope. There was only endless white silence and stubbornness. Stupid, animal, Russian stubbornness. I won't surrender this piece of land. I won't give them this tank. As long as I am alive, here is the territory of the Soviet Union. Even if it's just 20 square meters inside an armored box, it is my country. In one of the days, when the blizzard howled particularly viciously, burying the tank in drifts up to the turret, I caught myself thinking that I had died. That this is hell. Cold, loneliness, and eternal waiting. I pinched my arm. Pain. Pain is life. So, alive. I took the nail and scratched a new mark. Deep. Crooked. 107, I whispered. The number seemed unreal. 107 days in a steel coffin. We are standing, comrade tank. We are still standing. Outside, a blizzard raged, sweeping away tracks of war, leveling craters, turning the steppe into a clean sheet. And under the snow, in the icy womb of the machine, one heart beat, refusing to obey the laws of nature. Thermodynamics was losing. Spirit turned out to be tougher than steel. December 1942 came not with frost, but with a roar. But this roar was different. All autumn, the sound of war rolled from the west, heavy, pressing, alien. Now the horizon thundered from the east. I would recognize this sound out of 1,000. The low, rolling bass of B-4 howitzers and the screaming, sky-tearing howl of rocket mortars. Katyushas! The front was returning. I sat in the gunner's seat, pressed against the icy armor. No strength to rejoice. The organism, having exhausted all reserves, worked in hibernation mode. The heart beat rarely, skipping, pushing thick, cold blood through narrowed vessels. I knew, hours are coming. But will they get here before I freeze completely? Morning turned out clear. The sun blinded, reflecting off endless snowfields. In the periscope I saw movement, not machines, people. They walked in a chain, in white camouflage suits, merging with drifts. Only black slits of eyes and blued steel of submachine guns gave away their presence. Reconnaissance. They moved cautiously, bounding, covering each other. Barrels looked at my tank. For them, this was a German position, a firing point that needs to be suppressed. I tried to shout, but my throat produced only a dry wheeze. Vocal cords atrophied from silence. If I don't give a sign, they'll throw a grenade into the hatch, or fire a burst at the viewing slits. Friendly fire. That's war statistics. Need to get out. I raised my hands to the turret hatch lock. Fingers didn't bend. They looked like wooden hooks wrapped in dirty rags. I leaned on the lever with all my body weight. The lock clanged, reluctantly yielding. Ice binding the coaming crunched. I pushed the hatch with my head. The lid swung back, letting in blinding light and frosty air. The attempt to stand ended in failure. Legs didn't hold. I pulled myself up on my arms, tumbled over the turret side, and crashed onto the armor like a sack. Then rolled onto the snow, hitting my hip painfully on the track. I lay in a drift, trying to inhale. Cold burned my lungs. A shadow loomed over me. "Halt!" Sharp shout. "Hands!" I raised my head. A PPSH barrel was looking at me. Behind it, eyes full of tension and anger. A young lieutenant in a camouflage suit. He saw not a human before him. He saw a creature. Dirty, overgrown with hair and soot, in rags of German greatcoats and a Soviet padded jacket. A living corpse crawled out of a grave. "Friendly," I whispered. The sound was quiet, rustling, like sand rubbing on stone. The lieutenant jerked, lowered the barrel a centimeter. "Who?" he asked again. "German?" "Gromov." I gathered remnants of will to speak clearer. "Senior Sergeant, driver mechanic, tank number—" I stumbled, remembering my machine's number. Digits evaporated from memory. "Tank T-34. Around me, other scouts already stood. They looked with disbelief, with disgust, with fear. "Alone?" The lieutenant squatted, looking into my face. "Where are the rest? Where is the crew? Where is the infantry?" I tried to sit up. Head spun, black flies swam before eyes. "No one," I said. "August. Everyone left. I stayed." "Since August?" The lieutenant straightened, looking back at his fighters. "You're lying, Pop. People don't live that long. Germans were here 3 days ago. A whole division was stationed here." "Stationed," I nodded. "And left. Didn't pass. Who held them? You or what? Alone?" In their eyes, I read the verdict. They thought I was a deserter, or a madman who strayed from his unit a week ago and hid in basements. They couldn't believe in the physics of the impossible. A loner doesn't stop a division. It contradicts regulations and common sense. I needed to prove my existence, justify my survival. "Help me up," I asked. 2 fighters grabbed me under the arms. I was light as an empty greatcoat, skin and bones. They dragged me to the tank's stern. "Look," I nodded at the system of cables going into the snow, to the ruined skeletons of dummies. "Pull." The lieutenant looked at me bewildered, then grabbed the cable. Pulled. 40 meters away from us, under a drift, something creaked. From under the snow rose a leaning wooden construction, imitating a turret. Canvas, from which snow fell off, exposed a roughly hewn log cannon. The scouts froze. "Pull the second one," I commanded. Commander notes cut through in the voice. He pulled the second cable. On the other side, from a crater, the skeleton of another dummy appeared, destroyed back in September, but restored by me in November. "That is my platoon, Comrade Lieutenant," I reported. I tried to straighten up, assume a position of attention, but my legs trembled so much I hung on the fighter's arms. "Engineering simulation of a tank formation. Fire support, 1 barrel. I maneuvered with fire and false targets. The Germans thought there was a company of us here." The lieutenant let go of the cable. He looked at the wooden scarecrows, then at my soot-covered, shrapnel-pitted tank, then at me. Everything changed in his gaze, from suspicion to shock, from shock to the horror of understanding. 107 days? He asked quietly. That's right, 107. I unbuttoned my padded jacket, took out from the inside pocket, from the very warmth, my logbook, a piece of plywood on which I marked days and ammo consumption with charcoal and a nail, handed it to him. He took this dirty board like a holy relic. Fingers in white knitted gloves touched crooked notches. Shells ran out in October, I commented dryly, as if handing over a shift. Ammo for the DT, same time. 1 grenade in the TT remained. Equipment functional, battery dead. Water in the system drained to not freeze the block. Gun preserved with grease. Tank not combat ready, but as a firing point, was ready. The whole scout platoon gathered around us. Young, rosy, strong guys, in warm sheepskin coats, fed, smelling of tobacco and bread. They looked at me like an alien from another planet, a planet where life is a statistical error. Someone handed me a canteen. Drink, pop, spirit. I took a sip. Fiery liquid burned my parched throat, fell into the empty stomach like a red-hot ball. I swayed. The world rocked. Tears, which hadn't been there all these months, suddenly spurted from my eyes. Not from pity, from warmth, from the fact that I am no longer alone. "What did you eat here?" someone from the fighters asked, looking at my matchstick arms. "Mice," I answered simply. And hope. The lieutenant took off his glove and extended his hand. A warm, living palm. "Lieutenant Smirnov," he introduced himself. His voice trembled. "Thank you, Sergeant. You gave us time. We are breaking their backs near Stalingrad right now, and they, it turns out, were looking for a crossing here, and didn't find it." I shook his hand. My palm drowned in his handshake. "Didn't find it," I echoed. "It was occupied here." At that moment I felt the tension that held me upright for 107 days snap. The string broke. Legs gave way. Darkness rolled in as a soft, warm wave. I was falling into the snow, but the snow wasn't cold. It was a down feather bed. The last thing I heard before passing out was the lieutenant's shout, "Medic! Radio! Call Volga! Tell them found! Found a hero!" But I didn't care. I completed the task. I handed over the post. The mechanism stopped. Now I could just be a human. A weak, sick, mortal human. I fell into a dreamless sleep. The first calm sleep in a quarter of a year. The war for me was over. The return began. The light was white, cutting, unnaturally clean. It didn't smell of burning. It smelled of bleach, carbolic acid, and boiled cabbage. This smell hit my nose before I could open my eyes and caused a wave of nausea. The brain, accustomed to aromas of diesel and decomposition, refused to accept sterility. I lay on my back. Under me was something frighteningly soft. It sagged, enveloped, deprived of support. I jerked, trying to find hard armor, feel for a lever, but hands hit emptiness. Panic overwhelmed instantly. Where am I? Where are the walls? Why so much air? "Easy, easy, soldier." A female voice, soft but authoritative. "Friends. Hospital. You are in the rear." I opened my eyes. The ceiling was infinitely high, white plaster with cracks. I squeezed my eyes shut. Space pressed down. After 107 days in a tight steel box, a regular ward seemed like a hangar where a human gets lost like a speck of dust. They tried to wash me. It was torture. When nurses cut off my rags, what the uniform had turned into, skin came off with the fabric. The padded jacket had grown into wounds, foot wraps melted into ulcers on my legs. I didn't scream. I had no strength for sound. I just watched them remove my shell, leaving a naked, red, trembling piece of meat. I heard the doctor's diagnosis through a cotton veil. He dictated to a clerk, and his voice was dry as a tribunal verdict. Alimentary dystrophy of the 3rd degree, scurvy, general frostbite of extremities of the 2nd degree, multiple trophic ulcers, weight 43 kilograms, pulse thready, prognosis doubtful. 43 kilograms. Half of me remained there in the steppe. I was a skeleton covered in parchment. Joints bulged in knots, stomach stuck to the spine. I looked at my knees, sharp as razors, and didn't recognize them. It was the body of an old man, a camp prisoner's body, but not a soldier's body. The first week passed in delirium. They fed me with a spoon like a baby. Rice water. Warm, slimy. The stomach, shrunken to the size of a fist, accepted it with a fight. Every swallow was work. The organism forgot how to digest food. I vomited. I shook in fever. Temperature jumped from 35 to 40. But nights were the scariest. Silence in the ward was different. Not dead, like in the tank, but living. Someone moaned, someone snored, glass clinked. But I was scared to sleep on the bed. It was too high, too exposed. I felt like a target. On the 3rd night, a nurse found me on the floor, under the cot. I curled up there, covering my head with a government blanket. It was tight, hard, and safe there. "Gromov!" She tried to pull me out. "What are you doing? You'll catch a cold. Get up!" "As you were," I croaked. Voice returned slowly, was scratchy and alien. Here armor is thicker. Don't touch. They left me alone." Doctors understood. The psyche is broken worse than bones. The engineer inside me tried to fix reality, fitting it to familiar survival parameters. I built shelters from pillows. I hid bread crusts under the mattress, strategic reserve in case of encirclement. Gradually, I began to return, not as a human, but as a mechanism undergoing major overhaul. First, motor skills recovered. Hands stopped trembling. I could hold a glass of water without spilling. Then vision returned. Murky veil disappeared. Colors became bright. I learned to walk anew. First sit, dangling legs. Blood drained from the head, vision darkened. Then stand, holding onto the bed frame. Step. Another step. Muscles, atrophied by months of immobility, hurt like hell. But I forced them to work. The principle is the same as with a jammed lever. Push until it gives. In the ward, there were 12 of us. Tankers, infantry, artillerymen, all critical cases. One missing a leg, another, a face. We almost didn't talk. Talk about what? Pain? It's the same for everyone. Death? We've seen too much of it. But they looked at me askance. Rumors in a hospital spread faster than a virus. That one, from the coffin. Dead man. They didn't believe. One day a colonel came. Political department. Clean uniform, creaking belts, smell of expensive tobacco. He sat on a stool next to my bed. I was already sleeping on it, having forced myself to accept this risk. "Nikolai Ivanovich Gromov?" he asked. "Yes, sir." I tried to rise, but he stopped me with a gesture. "Recommended for the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Decree signed." The star will be presented when you get on your feet. Moscow knows. Stalingrad held out, and there is your merit in this. Your tank delayed the transfer of Wehrmacht reserves on a critical sector of the front for 4 days. And then by your simulation of activity, you pinned down enemy forces for weeks. This is a feat. I listened to him and felt nothing. Words were beautiful, correct, but they had no weight. Feat? I didn't run into an attack shouting hurrah. I didn't cover an embrasure with my chest. I just sat in an iron pit, ate mice, and pulled strings to not go crazy. I just wanted to live, very much. Heroism is, it turns out, a side effect of the self-preservation instinct multiplied by engineering savvy. I serve the Soviet Union, I answered with the regulation phrase. The colonel left, and following him came a nurse, old, in a white headscarf. She put a triangle on my nightstand. A letter. Paper was gray, cheap. Field post stamp. Date. November, 42. Hands began to tremble. Not like from hunger, but from an electric discharge hitting the nervous system. I knew this handwriting. I opened the envelope for a minute, afraid to tear, afraid inside is emptiness, or a death notice for myself. Kolenka, letters jumped. We are alive. We were evacuated beyond the Urals. It is cold here, but the factory is working. I stand at a machine, making shells. Nadia started first grade. She writes to you every day, but nowhere to send, no address. We believe you will be found. The heart says you are breathing. I stopped breathing. The air in the ward suddenly became thick and hot. They are alive. All these 107 days when I was freezing in armor, when I counted bullets, when I talked to hallucinations. It wasn't for nothing. My personal war had meaning. I didn't just hold the crossing. I held the door to their house. If the Germans had passed here, they could have reached evacuation trains too. I pressed the letter to my face. It smelled not of gunpowder and not of bleach. It smelled of machine oil and bread. Smell of the rear. Smell of life. A sound tore from my chest. Not a cry, not a moan. A laugh. Hoarse, barking, terrible laugh of a man who cheated death. Neighbors in the ward turned their heads. They looked at a skeleton shaking on the bed, pressing a gray piece of paper to his face. Alive, I whispered. Hear that, guys? They are alive. At that moment, something clicked inside. The last nut fell into place. The mechanism, smashed and twisted, started working again. I ceased to be the one from the tank. I became human again. I had a future. Not abstract, defeat the enemy, but concrete. Fix the porch Masha wrote about. I looked out the window. There, behind the glass, snow was falling. Quiet, peaceful snow. It was no longer my enemy. It wasn't trying to kill me. I survived, but I changed forever. That former Gromov, the cheerful mechanic with an accordion, died in August 42 in the steppe near the Don. A different man will leave the hospital. A man who knows the price of every sip of water, every piece of bread, and every minute of silence. A man who has a perpetual motion machine running on stubbornness inside instead of a heart. "Nurse!" I shouted, voice strengthened. "Nurse, give me a pencil and paper. I need to answer." I wrote the answer, and letters lay on paper in even rows, like tracks on a road. I wrote not about battle, not about hunger, not about rats. I wrote that I would come soon, that I am now a hero, and we will get firewood without waiting in line, that I will fix everything that broke. The war continued. The roar of cannonade was audible even here, hundreds of kilometers away. But my personal Battle of Stalingrad ended. I came out of the steel coffin not a corpse, but a witness. And now my task is to live for those who remained in that steppe forever. Live and remember that a human is tougher than any metal if he has someone to protect. History does not like the subjunctive mood. History loves facts. And the facts are: the 295th Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht, the elite of the German army, a perfectly lubricated mechanism of blitzkrieg, was late for Stalingrad. It got stuck in the Don steppe. In its operational reports, this was listed as local battles for position improvement and difficulties with crossing due to unidentified enemy forces. Behind these dry lines hid shame. A whole division stumbled over one man. If you overlay the map of those days onto a calendar, the terrible mathematics of war becomes visible. 4 days of active combat, a week of artillery duels, and months of paralyzing fear of the Russian garrison in the reeds. It was precisely these days, these hours and shells, that Paulus lacked to close the ring in the city. One broken track saved thousands of lives, somewhere over the horizon, in the burning ruins of Stalingrad. The butterfly effect, cast in iron. The war ended for everyone in 45. For Gromov, it never ended. It just changed its state of aggregation. From the hot phase, it passed into cold, chronic memory of metal. Nikolai Ivanovich returned home, to Masha, to Nadia. He fixed the porch, re-roofed the house. He returned to the factory. Hands that held a grenade with the pin pulled again took up wrenches. He became the best mechanic in the shop. He felt metal fatigue with his fingertips. He heard diseases of engines by ear, like a doctor hears wheezing in lungs. But he changed. He stopped laughing. He never went to parades. When fireworks thundered, he went to the shed, closed the door, and smoked one cigarette after another until the sky stopped exploding. He couldn't hear that sound. For him, any bang was a signal that armor was pierced. People considered him unsociable, strange, hero of the Soviet Union, star on the jacket, but silent as a fish. No one knew he simply forgot how to talk about nothing. After 107 days of silence, words have a different price. Saying "pass the salt" is simply information transfer. Saying "I love you" is an effort comparable to turning a turret by hand. 20 years passed. The steppe was overgrown with grass, craters smoothed out, overgrown with wormwood. The earth knows how to heal its wounds better than people, but iron doesn't rot that fast. The tank was raised. Sappers clearing the bank found it. It stood in the same place, grown into the soil up to the fenders, black, terrible, majestic. Inside was empty. Only on the wall, scratched with a nail, shone 107 notches. Survival calendar. They didn't melt it down. They decided to keep it. Gromov came to the monument opening. He stood in the crowd, in his Sunday suit that hung on him like a sack. His former weight never returned. Wind stirred gray hair. Speeches were made around. Party workers, pioneers, veterans spoke beautifully. About courage, about fortitude, about no one is forgotten. Gromov listened and winced. Words were too smooth, too round. They lacked the grit of sand on teeth. They lacked the smell of rotten potato and taste of mouse blood. When the official part ended and people moved to tables, He approached the pedestal. The tank stood on a concrete base, nose pointed to the sky. It was painted with fresh green paint, holes welded shut, red stars painted on. It looked dressy, like a toy. Gromov placed his palm on the cold armor of a road wheel. The paint was rough. Under it, he knew, hides old, petrified mud of 42. "Hello," he said quietly. "So, brother, washed you, dressed you up?" The tank was silent, but for Gromov, it was alive. He remembered every lever inside, every weld seam. It was his second body, his iron lung. "Remember how we froze?" he asked, stroking the metal. "Remember how you cooled and I warmed you with breath? We were one whole then. You, skin, I, heart." In the crowd, someone whispered, "Look, Gromov himself is talking to the tank." "Let him talk," someone admonished. "He has the right. They are old acquaintances." Gromov pressed his forehead to the armor, closed his eyes, and for a second it seemed to him there were no 20 years, no grey hair, no peaceful sky. There was only a narrow slit of the periscope, smell of diesel, and trembling of earth from passing German trains. He remembered that feeling of absolute ringing loneliness, and feeling of absolute cold power over the situation. Back then, he was a god in this machine, a god of war on a local scale. "We did them," he whispered. "We didn't let them pass. Sleep well. Your shift is over." He stepped away, looked at the muzzle brake of the cannon. It looked west, where they came from, and where they went forever. This monument stands there to this day. Wind from the Don polishes its sides. Rains wash away dust. Tourists stop, read the plaque. Here, in the autumn of 1942, the crew of Tank T-34, consisting of Senior Sergeant Gromov, N.1, heroically held, they read numbers, 107 days, 1 division, 1 man. They shake their heads, trying to imagine, but imagining it is impossible. It can only be lived. The history of this tank is not a history of technology. T-34 was the best tank of the war, everyone admits that. Genius simplicity of design, sloped armor, powerful diesel. But the tank itself is just 30 tons of dead material, a pile of ore mined from the earth and smelted into form. Man makes it a weapon. Caliber doesn't win wars. Will wins. The ability of a human to say no when physics says impossible. The ability to turn one's flesh into an extension of the mechanism, and the mechanism into an instrument of spirit. Gromov proved a terrible theorem. One man is a warrior in the field if that warrior knows what he stands for. If behind his back isn't just a dot on a map, but a house where they heat the stove with birch wood and where a daughter draws his portrait. As long as this tank stands on the bank of the Don, we stand too. As long as we remember how one mechanic forced the enemy to fight ghosts, we are invincible. Because in each of us, somewhere deep, under layers of daily life and comfort, sits this stern, hungry, angry Gromov, and waits. Waits for the moment when one needs to batten down the hatch, wipe blood from the face, and say, "Occupied." And this isn't pathos. It's an instruction manual for reality. If the engine broke, become the engine yourself. If shells ran out, become the shell. If hell is around, become the demon this hell fears. Iron rusts, memory fades, but notches on the heart remain forever. 107 notches. 107 steps into immortality.